Welcome to this segment of yoga sequencing for beginners. Today I'm going to give you a demonstration or example of a yoga sequencing method I call the wave flow. If you saw last week's video, that was on what I call the ladder flow. And so in this video, I'm actually going to use the exact same poses to create an entirely different class with a different style of sequencing, known as the wave flow. I created a video a while back called the 10-Step Guide to Yoga Class Sequencing, which sort of became the basis to what I teach. I help teachers with yoga sequencing and teaching tips, both online and offline. Today we're going through wave flow style. And here is what I've got. Feel free to take a screenshot. I don't typically write my classes down on paper because memorization is actually a skill that can be improved. Because I've been doing this for a long time and I have taught thousands of classes using this same framework, basic framework of sequencing, I now usually sequence my classes on the fly. But really, I have a really good base, so I know what works well together. But for this example, I did write it down because I wanted to show you what it might look like with writing it down. Unlike the ladder flow where we build pose by pose, this one we're actually doing the whole group of yoga poses, 4, 5, or 6 yoga poses as a base, and then we do it again, but we add on a variation or intensification to a pose or two, and then we do it again to create a different wave. So it becomes this like little wave to a medium wave to a bigger wave. And we can usually do 3, 4, maybe 5 waves in the middle of a practice. It depends on how long you want to make your class. I typically think 3 or 4 is fine. So what this looks like is that bell-shaped curve that we have for our yoga practice, where we've got our warm-up, the middle section, which is the heat building, that's where the work happens, and then the cool down. The two end pieces, the warm-up and the cool down, can kind of stay the same class to class. You don't have to vary those a whole lot. You don't have to create a lot of creativity for the beginning and the end. In fact, your students will appreciate knowing what to expect to get started and also knowing the sequence to end the practice. It just will feel kind of nice having those bookends. It's in the middle where we can get a little more creative. All of the sequencing methods that I teach are typically based in that middle section where the warm-up and the cool down sort of play off of that middle main pose, maybe a peak pose or a main group of poses or a theme. So I've got 5 base poses, the same poses I used in my ladder flow video, and those poses are as follows: Crescent Lunge, Warrior 3, Warrior 2, Side Angle, and Bird of Paradise. And I'm actually going to leave out Bird of Paradise until the 3rd wave. This class is going to be 3 waves, so until the 3rd wave, because that's actually a peak pose, it's our big hurrah, that will be the final pose. So I'm going to leave it for the 3rd wave. So to get started though, we look at those poses and say, okay, that's a big hip opener, so I'm going to start the same way I did in my ladder flow video, where we've got child's pose. This is where you talk about the breath, you sit here for a while, we get grounded, centered, all that good stuff. And then we come forward and into some spinal movement, some warm-ups for the spine and core. So it could be cat and cow. I mean, you can add other things like a spinal extension or even some hip rotations. So it's really just about moving through the body in the center, creating that heat to get us going. Always, if we start from seated or this tabletop position, we'll come up to a down dog and slowly transition. I teach vinyasa classes, which means moving with breath to do something with purpose. So it's very flowy. So I don't want any of these movements to be jarring. From the first forward fold, we roll ourselves up just to stay safe on the back, or you can even walk the hands up. We do it slowly. Roll the shoulders back. And this is where we could set an intention, find that mountain pose, get centered, start standing. So this is still within the first, 5, maybe 10 minutes of our practice. It's really right away that we get standing. And in my warm-up, I continue with 3 sun salutation A's. I'm not going to do any sun salutation B's Because our waves are really a lot of lunges anyway, the first one I go through slowly, so it doesn't really connect with the breath, especially if I have new students in class, and it's also great for anyone to hit the basics. So I talk about mountain pose and the alignment, reaching up, where our gaze is, how the breath should feel, exhale, swan dive, and this might be like extra slow. And the half lift, hands can be on the shins, make sure you're pressing into them. So anyway, we're really just talking about the sun salutation slowly, giving options and variations. You could come to the knees in your plank pose, press into the hands, gaze at the top of the mat, all the things, lengthen through the crown of the head. Because I'm more of a power vinyasa teacher, I typically teach the chaturanga. You can skip it, or even come down to the belly for cobra pose afterwards, or up dog. Again, holding these poses a little longer the first time and slowly transitioning. We can hold in down dog or walk it right away forward. It is good to talk about that down dog, that second down dog, the first sun salutation A down dog. Stay there for a while. Half lift, forward fold, rise up. And you might have a different variation of that sun salutation A. That's okay, that's awesome. So do your variations of sun salutations for your warm-up. And that should be then about 15, maybe 20 minutes into the practice. Now we're into the main work, which is the waves. So the first wave, we're doing Crescent Lunge, Warrior 3, Warrior 2, and side angle. So you can simply just step right back. I like to use the sun salutation as a way to transition. So I'll reach up, forward fold, half lift, exhale, step back, chaturanga, up dog, and downward facing dog. And from there we'll lift the leg, bend the knee, step the foot between the hands. Low lunge to high lunge, and here we'll hold for a few breaths to feel that crescent lunge. Enjoy it. Transitioning to Warrior 3, hands go down, we shift forward, lift off, hold this for a while, breathe through it, then step back, and you'll notice that those two poses are both internally rotated hip poses, meaning hips, this back leg is rotating inward, and then as we get into the next two poses, it's an external rotation, so I'm grouping those together. So we've got Warrior 2 and side angle, both this externally rotated back leg, back hip, but the heel is still the farthest point from the body. So I'm not going to go, Crescent Lunge, Warrior 2, Warrior 3. We're going to avoid the turning back and forth as much as we can. So we group like lunged poses together. And then, we end here. Okay, I come back to Warrior 2 typically to transition. Either Warrior 2 or Crescent Lunge are great places to come back down. Back heel lifts, and you can choose to step forward or step back. What are you going to do in between? You might just come to down dog. You might go through that vinyasa. You might come to standing, but just choose what you're going to do in between your waves, or even in between the right and left side. Then you'll do the left side or the other side. So then we get into wave 2. Because we know we're going to Bird of Paradise, you might want to stretch out those arms or open up the back and shoulders a little more. So we're doing a lot of leg type stuff, a lot of strength in the legs. So with our Crescent Lunge, we can choose. Maybe the second wave, we add an arm variation, like arms behind the back, clasp, or even eagle arms. You can even keep the arm variation through the Warrior 3, and maybe add a different arm variation or the opposite for your Warrior 2 and even your side angle. So that's up to you. I would definitely, for Bird of Paradise, the intensification in the second wave is going to be more for the upper body. Now other intensifications that you could do, like for Crescent Lunge, might be lifting the heel. That's one that could get you feeling more into the legs. For Warrior 3, there's some movement we could do, squats or whoop, or even grabbing the back leg, so you can get kind of playful here. Balance is tough on carpet. But the second one isn't a lot of intensity, but it's just variations that's going to help warm up the areas of the body that need to open up a little bit more. And in between, you do your vinyasa or you step forward or, transition as you do. In between wave 1 or 2 or 2 or 3, you can always add a little sprinkle of core work. Let's say you want to come down and do some, boat pose stuff to really enhance the core. You can definitely do that. It can be plank, it can be boat pose. There's a lot of ab work that you could potentially do. I really like plank pose and a lot of its variations because, why? Because it's like a full body strengthening. And if you can master a plank pose, a lot of your other movements are going to be a lot stronger. So then we're on to wave number 3, which is going to be our final wave. You usually have time for 3, maybe 4. So crescent lunge, right? And you can stick with the arm variations again, or just go through the poses again with a little bit more intention towards what you're trying to build, the strength, flexibility. Maybe people know what they're doing, so it's a little bit of story time. Okay, warrior 2, side angle, and then the bind, right? So we can choose to bind here, maybe half bind or full bind. Give a lot of options as you go into this bigger pose. And then that last and final peak pose, you let people know they can come up and do bird of paradise. However you would cue that. Come back down, all the way through, and finish up. And we're going to stick with that same cool down I had in our ladder pose, ladder flow sequence, which was a pigeon pose or some sort of external hip rotation, because that feels good after bird of paradise. But instead of, say, kneeling pigeon, maybe this one's a bit much for your students or your audience today, you could do a seated figure 4 or even reclined on the ground. So know that there are a lot of variations of poses that aren't so good maybe for someone's knee, or I'm giving variations. That's especially pertinent with teaching online. You want to be able to offer variations for people who might not be able to do a pose because of a certain injury or something in their body, but you don't know it because you're on a screen and it's hard to see, right? So offering those variations. And then we come to seated. We do some seated poses and some lying down poses. And what I'm doing for the seated poses is really just thinking about, what do I need a little bit more of? What were the poses we did, and what do I feel like would neutralize or balance out the body? And so it could be a seated twist. We haven't done a lot of twists, so it might be nice to add a little bit more ringing out. And then, of course, you do both sides. A forward fold, that's always good. I like a good bound angle in there. I honestly don't get too specific with the seated poses or like the reasons behind them. I really just want to feel a few poses that are going to help me feel like balanced through the whole body. So if you practice this on your own, even if it's like a 15-minute practice, you'll start to notice, what's going to help to make everything feel balanced. You could add boat pose here, yay! Or if you did it before, you don't have to. You roll down and do a bridge pose, knee hug, legs up the wall. I'm just going through these quickly, not as you actually would. Knees in, twist from side to side, one side then the other, hold a while. Hug the knees one more time, maybe happy baby. I like to leave space for anyone to, you take a minute to finish out any poses that you might feel you need extra, and then it's Shavasana. And then we get up, not like that, but as you typically would teach people to roll to the side, get back up, and we finish our practice. And so that is the wave method or wave flow style for yoga sequencing, where you pick a base of 4 or 5 poses. If you're doing lunges, keep the internal poses together, the externally rotated hip poses together, group together, and you add on the next wave, you add more intensity, the next wave you add more. Okay, I hope that was understandable, and I hope this gave you some insight and some inspiration for sequencing your own classes, whether it's for teaching online or in person, or it's for sequencing your own home practices so that you can become a more confident yoga practitioner and yoga teacher. I have a wonderful community of yoga teachers and yogis over on Facebook. It's over 4,000 people right now, which is amazing to me. It's in a group called Yoga Sequencing and Teaching Tips. I would love if you went over there and joined that group. I'd love to see you there. It's a great place to ask questions or get some insights. I do have a free 4-part guide to yoga class sequencing. If you go to ashesyoga.com/guide. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button, give this a like, and leave a comment with what you prefer, ladder flow or wave flow. Which one would you rather practice or you rather teach? And if you haven't watched my ladder flow video, go ahead and do that and leave a comment on this video or that video, letting me know which style you prefer. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video.